Welcome to Face the Nation. I'm Bill Plant, substituting for Leslie Stahl. As the superpowers cut their nuclear arsenals, the nations of the Middle East seem bent on arming to the teeth with a new generation of deadly weapons. The latest evidence, the arrests in London of 5 people charged with smuggling nuclear detonator parts to Iraq.
These capacitors are electric energy storage cells designed to dump some 5,000 volts of electricity into a trigger, which in turn detonates a nuclear missile warhead.
The devices, labeled as air conditioning parts, were seized at a London airport. Police arrested the executives of an export company they say was shipping the goods to a government agency in Baghdad. The U.S. and Britain accused the Iraqi government of masterminding the plot.
Every country has the right to protect itself. So, even based on the international law, they have no right to interfere and prevent Iraq from doing that.
Despite a ceasefire in its war with Iran, Iraq's leader Saddam Hussein has been spending lavishly on an arms buildup. He has used poison gas and tested a ballistic missile, sparking concern that Iraq could launch a nuclear warhead.
Now Iraq could retaliate if its nuclear facilities were attacked by firing a missile, let's say with chemical warheads, back at the attacking country.
International pressure has failed to slow the arms race. That fire at Libya's nerve gas plant 2 weeks ago may have been a hoax. It might still be functioning. Arab states say they need to arm themselves because Israel has nuclear weapons, perhaps as many as 100.
I do not rest easy under the current circumstances, contemplating the possibility of a number of those nations in the Middle East acquiring ballistic missile capability and weapons of mass destruction.
How close is Iraq to having a nuclear weapon? We'll ask Deputy Foreign Minister Nizar Hamdoun. And we'll talk about stopping the nuclear spread with Senator John McCain of Arizona and former Assistant Secretary of State Richard Murphy. Will nuclear weapons be used in the next Mideast war? An issue facing the nation.
From CBS News, Washington, Face the Nation with Leslie Stahl.
With us now from Baghdad, Nizar Hamdoun, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Iraq. Good day to you, sir, and welcome.
Welcome, thank you.
The U.S. indictment makes the claim that the people arrested were acting on behalf of the Iraqi government, and further that the parts that were seized were destined for an Iraqi government agency. Was your government involved, sir?
My government was not involved in getting any detonators the way they are suggested in your introduction. Iraq was interested in getting the high velocity, rather high voltage capacitors who have many industrial applications and laser and in other industrial fields. And Iraq was in touch with the British company, which in its part contacted the American company and asked for them to supply it. And the open telexes were back and forth between Iraq and Britain and the American company in California, and those were open telexes talking about specific matter, which I addressed. The undercover agent, according to our documents, was trying to drag Iraq's leg into the issue, and we have all the telexes that he has sent inducing the Iraqi authorities and the officials and the Iraq government on some what he called switches or sensitive material. But our people have never responded to that, and I focused only on the high velocity capacitors.
Well, Mr. Hamdoun, the indictment alleges that in conversations which took place about the specifications of those capacitors, that they were requested by the Iraqi people involved to be of a very high tolerance for military use, high altitude, withstand vibration and shock waves, and be only for one-time use. The experts all say that the only way you use those is in a bomb.
The high-velocity capacitors?
Made to those specifications, yes.
I think most of the experts agree that these are for various uses that, I mean, at least for the laser systems, the power supply for laser systems, and for the cutting machines for plasma metal, and also for the separation of some stages of missiles, but nothing on the nuclear stuff. So we are not involved in any nuclear weapon discussion. And I should repeat here my...
Go ahead,
Sorry.
sir. Go ahead.
My government's position is that Iraq has neither the capability nor the wish to produce nuclear weapons. And Iraq is a member of the IAEA and a party to the NPT. And being committed ourselves, we have received experts twice last year from the IAEA, last in November. And this next week, they are due in Baghdad to inspect all the Iraqi nuclear technology installations.
Well, Mr. Hamdoun, the U.S. government says that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, monitors only one nuclear plant in Iraq. And it is now widely believed that Iraq has dispersed its nuclear research facilities to a number of locations. Is that right?
Well, we have accepted all the safeguards of the IAEA, and Iraq is also participating in the effort to revise the whole safeguards. And whatever the IAEA says about Iraq's alleged activities, according to those reports, Iraq will be abiding by those safeguards and by whatever the agency said.
But
Iraq's record has been clean on that.
But do they see all of your nuclear installations? Does the IAEA see everything that Iraq is doing with regard to nuclear technology?
Well, Bill, I have not joined them in their tour, but whatever they ask, and when they go back to Vienna, they issue their own report. And if they were not satisfied, I believe they would have written that their reports on Iraq, which is up to now is very clean.
Mr. Hamdoun, the company which makes the devices which were exported to England for export to Iraq says that in the configuration that they were shipped, they really are useful only for a nuclear bomb or perhaps for a guided missile of a certain high technology type. They believed that what Iraq wanted were parts for a nuclear bomb.
That's not true, Bill. At least from our part, we are not involved in that specific matter. Missile technology, yes, I've indicated that earlier, that it's one of the fields, but mainly it was for the research on laser or the laser systems in our technological research centers. And Iraq is interested in that area. We have never thought of utilizing that thing in the nuclear process.
If your intent...
All the documents show that.
If your intent is to build a nuclear bomb, why not just admit it and say why you need it?
No, we are not interested in the nuclear bomb. And I've mentioned this is Iraq's policy, that we don't have the capability and we don't have the wish to do that.
But then just recently, authorities seized a shipment of pumps which are used to centrifuge uranium and enrich it. Can you blame people for being skeptical of Iraq's claims that it is not interested in nuclear weapons?
Who sees that? I've not seen that report, Bill.
Well, authorities in the U.S. seized a shipment which they said was bound for Iraq of pumps, which are vacuum pumps, which are used to process nuclear fuel.
I'm not aware about that. I'm no expert to understand what exactly a pump should mean in that context.
Would you be interested in a treaty to negotiate limits on missiles and high technology weapons in the Middle East? Would Iraq be willing to subscribe to such a treaty?
I think anything comprehensive in the region on mass destruction weapons, Iraq has been prepared to discuss. And that has been our position for the last couple of years. But we don't like to be dealt with selectively on this or that weapon, because we think that all mass destruction weapons should be eliminated and not to be selective and to specify and to single out one country.
But Iraq seems to have mass destruction weapons, speaking specifically of the chemical weapons which were used in the Iran-Iraq war. Why does Iraq feel it needs such weaponry?
Well, I think Iraq has developed that weapon under the threat of the Iranian invasion of our country and under the threat of Iraq being taken over by the Iranians, and we are not far from that time. when everybody was recognizing this fact. So under those situations, we developed those capabilities and we use them to defend our land. And since the ceasefire, Iraq has never used that weapon.
But Iraq has also been charged with using those chemical weapons against Iraqi Kurds, citizens of your own nation.
Well, that's not true. In the context of the war, before the ceasefire, there were some instances on the borderline which we have with Iran, which is almost 1,200 miles. In some instances, it had some effect on some civilians, probably in the context of the fighting with the Iranians. But since the ceasefire, my government and myself personally have denied on many occasions that we have used it since August 1988.
Mr. Hamdoun, let me go back to the question of why Iraq is arming itself with such sophisticated weapons. Why does your nation feel that it is necessary to have missiles, to have chemical weapons, and, as much of the world thinks, to possibly even be preparing nuclear weapons?
Iraq feels since the beginning of the war with Iran and the continuous Iranian aggression on us, the doctrine that the Iranians still carry of exporting their own evolution to us, that we should keep the military edge. And I think we have the right to do so in order to deal with the disadvantage in our size and population compared to the Iranians. And there is also the Israeli threat. We all recall that in 1981 they attacked us and they destroyed our nuclear research reactor. So we feel that we have the right to create our own defense. Iraq has never thought of those weapons in any offensive manner, and Iraq is committed to using every weapon that it gains in a defensive manner.
How would you react if Israelis were to repeat their attack of 1981?
Well, I don't advise them to do that. I don't think anyone should advise them to do that. I think in our age now, countries cannot go for themselves and commit an act of aggression on another country, especially if that country has not initiated any similar thing. And Iraq will always have the right to retaliate, whether with this or that country. We have, I think, all the right to do that according to the international norms. And I think the Americans will do the same if they are to be subject to any similar attack or aggression.
Mr. Hamdoun, very briefly, how does Iraq see its role in the Middle East?
I think Iraq sees its role in the Middle East in a constructive way. Iraq has been a very active member in forming new groupings, the one that we had with Egypt, Jordan, and Yemen. And I think Iraq is very keen to consolidate the Arab world and to have the language of dialogue and of cooperation be used rather than the use of force, and the non-aggression commitments between each other. And we have been advocating those principles for the last few years.
All right, Mr. Hamdoun.
Iraq has practically, yes.
Thank you very much for being with us. We'll be back with more.
I think it's a smoking gun. You don't try to import a nuclear weapon detonator unless you really plan to make the bomb.
Joining us now from Phoenix, Senator John McCain. And in New York, Richard Murphy, the former Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs under President Reagan. Gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Well, Senator, you see that the Deputy Foreign Minister of Iraq denies the allegation that they're trying to make nuclear weapons. What can we do to prove this? Or is our evidence all circumstantial?
Well, Bill, first of all, if his remarks were not so disturbing, it would be almost amusing, because the facts are the Iraqis have for over a decade been attempting to acquire nuclear capability. They denied the existence of the Asirak facility that you mentioned was bombed by the Israelis. They denied the introduction of massive use of chemical weapons on the battlefield against Iran. They denied using against the Kurds, which was their own people, in an incredible massacre. And this whole effort, I think, is in keeping with the messianic mission of Mr. Saddam Hussein to become a dominant force in the Middle East and through the use of force and the acquisition of weapons of mass destruction.
Well, what do you think, Mr. Murphy? Can they get away with denying this, as you saw Mr. Hamdoun do?
Well, I think, first of all, our
detective work has been very, very thorough, and it's obviously continuing. The indictment's just been registered now. What that equipment was actually destined for, I think the investigation is going to show. Now, I think that what Mr. Hamdoun has said, though, should be looked at very carefully by our government, which is an interest in Iraq in a comprehensive agreement on weapons to eliminate weapons of mass destruction. He says we're against a selective agreement aimed just at Iraq, but we would be prepared to get into a comprehensive agreement. I think we need to devote more energy to that.
And Mr. Murphy, you believe that such an agreement is a good idea, yes?
I do indeed, because I think the Middle East region is one of the most volatile and dangerous areas in the world today, not just in the third world, given the spread of technology, the great progress that has been made in the hands of indigenous military scientists, be it in the nuclear field, the chemical warfare field, or the beginnings that we're hearing about in biological warfare.
Meanwhile, Senator, you've got a bill, right, that would impose sanctions against countries and companies which trade in that area. Tell us just a little bit, briefly.
Yes, but we have legislation that would impose sanctions on companies and or countries that either buy or sell this kind of technology. Let me just add on to what Dick Murphy just said. I'm intrigued by Mr. Hamdoun's statement that he'd like to enter into agreements. I'd like to see them abide by the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, which they are signatories to, which clearly they're not in conformance with. So it seems to me that the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty is not working. We need legislation, both individually as a nation and collectively as amongst nations, to prevent what I believe is the greatest threat to world peace, and that's the proliferation of these weapons of mass destruction and the means to deliver them.
Senator, when the U.S. Congress tried to pass sanctions legislation against Iraq for using poison gas in '88, it got lobbied to death by business interests who were not interested in having sanctions over there. What makes you think it would be any different today?
I think conditions are such that people are much more aware of the dangers. The advances in technology have made this so easy to spread, and I think that finally we're beginning to focus, hopefully with the assistance and cooperation of the Soviet Union, on the enormity and the immensity of the challenges that this faces, that this presents us with.
Mr. Murphy, let me ask you this. Why does the U.S. government seem afraid to take the gloves off against Iraq, for want of a better analogy?
No, I don't think it is afraid to take the gloves off. Our Customs Service, this investigation that's gone on, is working just as assiduously as it did in past years when there was a similar movement. I think it was in the case of Krytrons going to Pakistan, similar equipment going to Israel. We have moved. It's a good effort, but it's not enough. The police action is not enough.
If there is a treaty, why should we think that Iraq would honor it?
Well, treaties are not self-implementing. It's got to be in Iraq's interest to honor it, obviously. They do want to be a major power in the Arab East. There's no question of that. But Mr. Hamdoun spoke of the threat from Iran, the threat from Israel. That's the way it's seen in Baghdad, that they still have to keep up their defenses. The fact is, was revealed this week, that Iraq has put in its western desert fixed launchers. I think those fixed launchers were designed to be discovered by Western intelligence and designed to convey the signal that they were not going to simply sit back passively and be threatened by attack.
So what should the U.S. be doing about this, Senator?
Well, Bill, first of all, could I mention, I don't think we have done enough. I think when the Iraqis introduced chemical weapons into the war with Iran, we all disliked the Iranians, to say the least, and we kind of turned a blind eye to some degree to that. And I think that we can do a lot more, and we need to do a lot more collectively. But I think that, in answer to your question, that the Iraqis have to be made clear that we will exercise all options, including that of military, if necessary, to prevent this enormous threat from continuing if they acquire the nuclear weapons we think they are maybe 3 to 5 years away from.
But when you come right down to it, isn't the U.S. really just depending on Israel to act again if this gets to the crunch point? If they really think that the Iraqis are closing in on the capability of nuclear weapons?
Well, I hope not, because clearly with this ballistic missile capability, although they're not accurate missiles, they could launch chemical weapons against Israel, which I think would be a deterrent against Israel. I think that we have to take the lead on this issue, and frankly, I don't think we have to the degree that we should.
Mr. Murphy, should the U.S. be taking the initiative in the Middle East?
I think we should. I don't think there's anybody else that's going to take it, and I agree with the Senator. It is our responsibility to take on that role.
Militarily as well?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what we might do militarily. I know when you come down to other options such as sanctions, there's not much point if it's going to be just the United States. Look at who's selling equipment to Iraq and the other countries. In Baghdad's case, it's the Soviet Union, it's France, both very interested in the hard currency they're going to get out of those sales. It has to be a general effort, not just an American effort.
And what about Israel's nuclear capability? The Iraqis, some say, wouldn't be trying to build nuclear weapons if Israel didn't already have them. Without commenting one way or the other, gentlemen, what do you think about that?
Bill, I neither condone nor support the Israeli nuclear capability, but I think it's well to remember that Israel is surrounded by a group of nations, of which Iraq is in the lead, which is dedicated to its extinction. Israel is not dedicated to the extinction of its neighbors. So it is understandable that the Israelis would move forward in that direction. At the same time, we have to apply the same pressures to Israel as we do to every other nation.
Mr. Murphy?
I'd agree with the Senator there. There can't be any exemption made when it comes to arms control in that region. But the fact is, at the moment, and this is a moment that should be seized, we do have a common interest with Iraq in a political solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. They have a very healthy respect for the Israeli military power. I don't think they're going to lightly tangle with Israel. They do want to have the capability to retaliate, as they've said. But they do have an interest in a political solution, and we should work on that.
Gentlemen, quickly, should the U.S. go ahead with the sale of supercomputers, which can help design nuclear weapons, to Israel, Pakistan, and India? Senator?
I don't believe so. I think they've got to be under careful restraints, and frankly, a lot of us have been concerned about that supercomputer sale, but I would be very reluctant to do so, particularly to those nations which we know, for example, like Pakistan and others, that are on the road towards acquiring a nuclear capability. And by the way, this nuclear club, as you know, is dramatically expanding, and we've got to stop it.
Mr. Murphy, should we sell those computers?
When, in the course of the last administration, we negotiated with India to sell the supercomputers, there was an understanding of very tight controls, very tight inspection, physical presence. And we were satisfied then that that would adequately guard against their misuse for nuclear purposes.
Gentlemen, we've got to go. I thank you both very much for joining us today. Senator John McCain of Arizona, former Assistant Secretary of State Richard Murphy, and we'll be back with a final word.
We have been able to defend Iraq without using a nuclear weapon, and we are able to do it again.
Our cartoon is by Wayne Stayskull. When the president said to just say no, he meant drugs, not broccoli. I'm Bill Plant. Have a good week.